Hey, I'm Trey K. This episode of Us and Them contains discussion of suicide and mental health crises. It may not be suitable for all listeners.
Good morning and welcome to the West Virginia Council of Churches press conference on the criminal justice system in West Virginia.
And they left me there for 72 hours.
Before we begin, I do want to take a moment to personally thank Governor Justice and the West Virginia State Legislature for the substantial legislation that was passed during the special session this past week.
Some days we didn't come out of our cell for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days.
It is a very good and real first step to remedying the current crisis, but a step does not a journey make.
People were going 12 days without a shower. People were denied toilet paper for 3 days.
When Jesus comes in his glory, none of us will have recognized him.
I couldn't even tell you how many grievances I put in.
And everyone will ask, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you naked? When did we see you without water? When did we see you in prison? And Jesus will say, when you did it to the least of these, when you saw it in the least of these.
I did everything except say I was going to kill myself.
Many incarcerated women face problems surrounding separation from children and family.
How old's your daughter now?
She's 6.
And you've had no communication with her?
No.
The prevalence of overdoses and fatalities in the state correctional facilities underscores the urgency of addressing the systematic issues at hand.
It seems humiliating.
It was utterly humiliating.
Where else do we impose the death penalty without benefit of legal counsel?
You say that you were not suicidal. I guess I'm wondering, what if you were?
Right. That's a very pertinent question. I had that question many times.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us. I'm Trey K. Overcrowding and understaffing have pushed West Virginia's prisons and jails to what many believe is a crisis point. There are so many staff vacancies. The facilities have been operating under a state of emergency. The situation affects most people involved in the state corrections system, but today we'll focus on what it's like for someone experiencing a mental health crisis while in jail, and why many people with mental illness are caught up in a criminal justice system that was never intended to treat them. Have you ever testified to the legislature or told your story, where it's been vetted publicly?
I have shared bits and pieces of my story over time, but no, I haven't publicly told this story before, really. This is kind of my first time.
Can you tell me who you are and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Lara Lawson. I am a lifelong West Virginian. I have spent my career doing various forms of mostly public service work.
Lara Lawson is from the town of Milton in Cabell County. She has her master's degree in sociology. She's passionate about social justice issues, and she's bipolar.
I've been diagnosed as bipolar 1 since I was about 21.
We used to refer to someone who is bipolar as manic depressive. A person with bipolar 1 can have manic episodes that last several days.
When I'm manic, like my brain is on fire, I can't use anything to really stop the process that's going on. You feel like you're euphoric, you feel like you're invincible.
Lawson says she's managed her bipolar pretty well over the years. She recognizes that she needs medication.
Honestly, my doctors tend to treat me on a fairly low dose of medication. I'm actually very high functioning, very intelligent, and I've always been able to pull off life pretty much, regardless of dealing with some severe mental health symptoms at times.
But there are trade-offs to being on constant medication. And a few years ago, she came across one she wasn't willing to make.
I've had to take my cautious risks when I chose to be a mother. And that cautious risk is, well, you just go without.
Lawson took that risk in 2012 to become a mom. She went off her meds. After her child was born, she stayed off her meds to breastfeed. A few years later, her unmedicated mental health issues reemerged.
So in 2015, I had a massive manic episode.
Lawson got into an argument with the person she was staying with. She left with her clothes in the dryer, and she found herself speeding down the interstate in her bathing suit.
They did clock me at a speed that was categorized as felony fleeing.
She says she ran a red light and found herself in a police chase.
I didn't know what was going on at first. And then there were several Huntington cops around me, and I started to realize what was going on, and then I just wanted to not die. So I continued to drive.
You don't want to die. One person would say, well, I'm going to pull over and I'm going to comply, but you chose to just mash your accelerator and zoom back to Milton.
That was what my manic brain told me to do.
Lawson says the police put out spike strips to stop her. She says she got out of the car, surrendered, and was taken to Western Regional Jail. Had you been to Western before?
No, it was my first time seeing what it was like. It was my first time being inside that system at all. And it was horrifying.
Lawson says she was surrounded by people she believes were detoxing from drugs. She was still in her swimsuit. After a couple of days, she says she was released on bail. But then a mental hygiene warrant was issued. That's a warrant for involuntary commitment. So Lawson says she went right back to Western Regional.
Automatically, if you are on a mental hygiene warrant, you are assumed to be a risk to yourself or others.
While Lawson says she was not suicidal, she recalls being put in the suicide watch cell for observation.
One of the glass cells that's right in front of the desk where the workers sit, right in front of where all the inmates come in and out for their court dates. It's a really tall cell. It had really high ceilings, but I could literally point my toe out and my arm out and reach both sides of it with the length of my body.
So very tall, but narrow.
Yeah, pretty narrow. Cold cement bench. You don't get anything except paper clothes. And I tried to put those paper clothes on, and they just never fit me. It was not possible to wear them, so...
Well, explain that to me. It was impossible to get them on, or they were paper and they ripped, or...
It was impossible. I mean, they were not so flimsy I couldn't wear them, but they were too small for me to wear.
So did you wear them?
No. I couldn't put them on. I could wear them halfway up my legs if I wanted to, and the shirt would sort of cover, but it just was annoying to me, more so than any kind of protection.
Lawson says as inmates came in and out of the jail through the intake desk, they could see her through the windows. And because the paper clothes would not fit her, she was essentially naked.
There was always a crowd. It's a windowed glass cell. There's only rails. I'm totally exposed.
And you were there for 72 hours?
I think I was actually held in that state for close to 21 days.
21 days?
I'm not positive about the number of days, but it was a lot of days. I spent July 4th there. I remember July 4th very clearly, and the meal that they fed us, and all the comments of the guards, and all the comments of the people coming in and out of the cells. And I remember, that's my curse, is I remember all the things.
Can you remind me of some of the comments that you heard?
Oh my gosh, like people would just make fun of my body. I mean, just crass things you would hear from prisoners that I don't typically love to repeat. But I mean, guards would make fun of me.
Lawson thinks part of the reason she was in that cell for so long is that she wasn't allowed to appear in court without her clothes.
And they just called me obstinate and refusing to wear the clothes, of course. And I missed court hearings and so on because they just wouldn't accept that the clothes didn't fit.
Was this observation, did it feel helpful in a therapeutic way?
Absolutely not. I'm pretty sure they never medicated me in the Western Regional system until they finally moved me to Sharp Hospital. And that's where I started receiving medication.
I guess one question is, you're there in a paper, well, you're naked because you can't wear the paper clothing. What about eating?
Oh, I ate. I mean, I ate my meals. I got up every day. Like, I did exercises. Like, I took baths. Actually, I did get a mat eventually because that was the one thing that I got, and a sink, and they would roll soap under the door for me so I could wash myself a little bit.
And what about defecating, going to the bathroom?
Oh, in front of everyone. I mean, the toilet is right there.
Wow.
Like, it's kind of angled, so you're a little off to the side, but it's not hidden or anything.
Wow. It just...
It boggles the mind.
It seems humiliating.
It was utterly humiliating.
You say that you were not suicidal. I guess I'm wondering, what if you were?
Right. That's a very pertinent question. I had that question many times. When I was in the jail itself, and as I, had my flashes of reality and of all the things, the horrors that I saw in jail, which weren't just me, which were when they finally transferred me into that lone cell and they picked up a woman who had already wet herself on the floor in her jail clothes and was just miserable in detox, and they took her out of the cell and she literally apologized to me for leaving the urine. And I said it's okay because nobody else seemed to care.
Why do we care about people who are in prison or those who guard them? Why do we care about that as followers of Jesus Christ? We care because we believe that every human being is made in God's image and likeness and deserves genuine respect simply for that fact.
Earlier this year, the West Virginia Council of Churches held a press conference about what it calls the ongoing crisis in the state's correctional facilities.
We have to work together. This is not us and them. This is not we are the enemy of the Department of Corrections. We are here to help make things easier for them.
Beverly Sharp is the executive director of the REACH initiative, which helps with the re-entry for people coming out of incarceration. Sharp commended the legislature and the governor for taking some action in early August to address problems in jails and prisons.
We are appreciative, certainly, of what has happened with the special session.
The legislature put aside about $30 million to address staffing shortages in jails and prisons and give pay raises and retention bonuses to correctional staff. Lawmakers also approved $100 million for deferred facility maintenance.
We appreciate Governor Justice. We appreciate both the House and the Senate. We appreciate the Commissioner of Corrections. But they just touched the tip of the iceberg. And so now they have to address the iceberg.
A new lawsuit against the state, filed on behalf of West Virginia inmates, demands a lot more money for staffing and deferred maintenance, $330 million. And that's not the only ongoing litigation. Southern Regional Jail is facing a class action suit alleging civil rights violations. And a lawsuit that was settled in September 2022 resulted in a new medical contract for all 10 West Virginia jails that focuses on improving medical and mental health care. Beverly Sharp says the need is clear.
We talk to people every day coming out of incarceration, every single day. And so we know what the conditions are like on the inside. But they can only fix those when they are given the funding and the empowerment to be able to do that. And that comes from the very top, that comes from the governor's office, down through the legislature to the commissioner.
Danny Deneen was at that press conference put on by the Council of Churches. Deneen introduces herself as a person in long-term recovery and justice. Over the holidays between 2018 and 2019, she found herself in a situation similar to Lara Lawson.
So I was in an admin seg cell with in a paper suit, and the paper suit kept like ripping. I remember I was like tying it together, and they wouldn't give me a new one.
That admin seg cell Deneen talks about was a suicide watch cell, right by the guard desk where everyone coming through intake could see her. While Lara Lawson was at Western Regional, Deneen says she was at Eastern Regional Jail. She calls it ERJ.
And the paper gown that they give you at ERJ is just a smock. And you tie it on the side, so no sleeve, no underwear, no bra. And, you sit down, it rips. You bend over to get a tray, it rips. It's paper thin, rips all the time. So I started like tying it together, and then I had it wrapped around my body like a towel, and I kept begging for another one. And, I was a nuisance to them. I was asking for something. They kept giving me the cold shoulder, like I was a Looney Tune.
Deneen says she couldn't get help from the staff, but she remembers a fellow inmate trying to assist her.
Every time he would come out and use the phone, when nobody was looking, he would like pull a pair of socks, or I think he gave me a sheet too. He wung a sheet under my door. I like pulled it in, so like he saw the desperate situation I was in. Like this poor girl is the very first cell, 24 hours of lights. Everybody can see.
Deneen's stay in jail took place over the Christmas and New Year's holidays, and she remembers it was cold. She believes she was in that cell for 5 days and in jail for a total of about 12 days.
I took a roll of toilet paper and I unwound it all and I laid on it like a bird's nest to try and stay warm. So picture somebody in a smock with no underwear on, laying in fetal position for the whole world to see, just trying to stay warm. It's just insane, they take people, especially, that are in a mental crisis and, further traumatize them in those situations. I don't know what the solution is, but I could tell you that's not it.
Lara Lawson and Danny Deneen each say they were incarcerated with paper garments that left them nearly naked and visible to people coming in and out of jail. Advocates say they're not the only ones.
I know multiple people who have went into a suicide suit and sat naked in a glass room. Sorry, this is awful.
Lyda Shepard works for the American Friends Service Committee.
This isn't just some that's just one-off situation. It's horrifying.
Shepard also spoke at the West Virginia Council of Churches event. She says her organization wants to see investments not just in jails and prisons, but in the mental health infrastructure to keep people with mental illness from ending up there in the first place.
In the face of a mental health crisis, we have an acute lack of behavioral health providers. We funnel thousands of people into a carceral system, exacerbating their trauma, exacerbating their mental illness, instead of getting them the treatment that they need and deserve.
We asked the West Virginia Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation to speak with us for this report, but they did not grant us an interview. When we come back, we'll hear from a journalist who offers some history on why people with mental illness are incarcerated so often.
Here in 21st century America, a prison system had recreated what America thought it had left behind: warehouses for the insane.
And we'll meet another woman who arrived in jail in the middle of a mental health crisis and has used her story to help change West Virginia's laws.
My mental state was reduced to a basic survival level, and I was offered no help.
That's coming up next after a break. You're listening to Us and Them. This program is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council and the CRC Foundation. This episode is supported with a grant from the Just Trust.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
Hey, it's Trey, and this is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. If you're just joining us, this episode contains discussions of suicide and mental health crises. It may not be suitable for all listeners.
We have time for one more speaker, so.
Our last speaker is Ashley Umps.
On June 13th, 2022, Ashley Umps rose from her seat and walked up to a podium to address members of the West Virginia State Senate.
Good morning, Ashley, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Umps was at the state capitol to testify before the Oversight Committee on Regional Jail and Correctional Facility Authority.
I'm Ashley Umps. I'm a formerly incarcerated person in recovery. I'm from Morgan County. I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I stand here in front of you today.
Wearing a sparkly gray and black top, taking deep breaths with her paper notes held firmly in both hands, Umps told a group of powerful strangers about the worst experience in her life.
I found my partner of 10 and a half years dead after he had committed suicide, and our 2-year-old daughter was beside me when I found him. I found myself incarcerated 3 days later for drugs.
It was uncomfortable for Umps to share her personal story that day.
I was lost, traumatized, and alone.
But it made a difference. Today, a West Virginia law has changed because people like Ashley Umps took their stories to the Capitol.
When you first walk in, everything, the landscaping is so beautiful. There's the big buildings around you and the statues and stuff like that.
Umps agreed to go with me to the West Virginia Capitol to tell me her story. We met in the Capitol Rotunda.
It's a giant open hallway, and there's beautiful ornate designs and everything everywhere.
Coming here for the first time is quite an experience.
The doorways to these people's offices are huge, the big heavy doors, and it's empowering. It feels like you have power when you walk into this room.
Umps has now testified twice in this beautiful and intimidating building.
And it looks like there's actually even a walkway up there. I've never been up there.
For Ashley Umps, this place, especially the Senate chambers, marks a turning point.
There's a statue, and he points to the Senate side. That's how I remember where I'm at all the time when I'm up here. The statue points to the Senate.
This is the first place she told her story, and it made a difference. She remembers one senator who was resistant to a bill that would limit the time a person could sit in jail waiting for their first hearing.
When I told her that I had waited in jail for 3 months waiting to see the judge, then that was when she realized that there was a problem. And she actually signed on to the bill and helped us get it passed. It's nice to turn my pain into a purpose. It's now my passion. My pain became my passion.
But to get to this place of purpose and passion, Umps went through a lot of pain.
So, you are in custody and you're heading to detention. What was going on in your mind?
I think to explain my full mentality, I'd have to go back a little bit.
In June 2018, Umps lost her brother to a car accident.
I had just gone through that, and then I was introduced to hard drugs. I was 28 years old. I had never seen heroin or meth before.
Umps says she started doing meth and also sold drugs. She was in a long-term relationship at the time that Umps calls tumultuous. She and her partner, Rick, had a daughter together. And the day before April Fool's Day 2019, their world changed. Umps says Rick went outside to tend to a generator, and she later found him hanging from a deck railing.
I seen him, and it was April Fool's Day, and he always used to make my life difficult with like jokes and stuff, so I thought he was kidding. And when I went to like backhand him on the chest, I realized that he was passed away.
I'm just noticing you seem to be shaking as you're telling me this story.
Yeah, I've been trying to get my mental health under control. I panicked and I called my mom and I was screaming, crying, and I told her I didn't know what to do. And right after I hung up with my mom, I called 911. And 911 said to cut him down. So I cut him down, and then they instructed me on how to give him CPR.
Umps says her 2-year-old daughter was there and witnessed the aftermath of her father's death. When the police arrived, they took Umps in for questioning.
So here you are, you witnessed the death of a loved one. What's going on in your head at that point?
I was lost. I was completely broken. Rick was all I ever knew, for 10 and a half years. He was everything. And whenever I was in the cop car and they were asking me to write a police report, I couldn't barely keep myself straight long enough to write sentences. I was somewhere else mentally. I think I had just, either I was in a state of shock or I had just checked out completely. They took me to the police station first and they interrogated me for a really long time. And I don't mind sharing this with the public, but when I found Rick, I peed my pants, and they would not even, the officers at the scene would not even let me go inside and change my clothes. So I sat in that police station with pants that I had peed in and got released in them. You know what I mean? I sat there that whole time like that.
Court documents show police began working with Rick's family to investigate Umps for possessing meth with intent to sell. She was arrested on drug charges within a few days of his death and taken to Eastern Regional Jail. She wouldn't leave jail for more than 3 months. And according to Umps, over the next 4 years, she'd spend 15 months behind bars.
So tell me about that. When you got to the jail, tell me about that.
Whenever I was getting booked in, I think one of the questions is something about something traumatic happening in 24 hours, the last 24 hours.
Umps told staff she had just witnessed a suicide. She says she was placed in a glass observation cell.
And they left me there for 72 hours. And whenever I first went in there, I got to talk to a counselor for maybe 30 minutes.
Then at the end of 72 hours, Umps says the counselor returned. They both agreed it would be better for her to be around people than by herself in isolation.
That was the last time that I got to see any kind of healthcare professional until I actually made it through the list for psych. And that was 3 months after I was there.
Were you on any medication while you were incarcerated at Eastern Regional?
No. They gave me detox meds when I got there, but that was it. That's why I was asking to go see psych so adamantly, because I wanted something for my anxiety and the depression that I was having, because I was suicidal when I was younger.
As Umps waited in jail for a court date, she couldn't escape news of the trauma she'd just experienced. While incarcerated, she read her partner Rick's obituary for the first time and saw news coverage of her drug arrest.
I was having night terrors. I was having flashbacks, and I would wake up screaming. I would jump straight up out of bed after laying there. My cellmate at one point was worried for my health and even put in and tried to get me in there to see somebody. And whenever it's so loud in there and you can't think, I've just screamed at the top of my lungs a couple times. You would think that it would garner some kind of attention, but I was on the list just like everybody else.
Umps says her flashbacks weren't just night terrors. There were day terrors, too.
It wasn't even me closing my eyes. I would be sitting there with my eyes open and I could see it vividly, it was there. And your heart starts pounding and you start sweating, and it's just you're right there in that moment. It's it happens over and over and over and over again. It haunted me.
You're thinking about that right now, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it still bothers me.
Umps says she signed papers granting temporary guardianship to Rick's brother because she was in custody and her daughter was with him already. Then Rick's family filed a court order that kept her from seeing her daughter at all.
She was only 2 years old in a couple months when this happened. So I don't even know if she remembers me, but I remember that. And that's why I said I still have PTSD. I'm still on medications. I'm still in therapy, and it's been 4 years.
How old's your daughter now?
She's 6.
And you've had no communication with her?
No, not since the night that her dad died. That was the last time I saw her.
Umps says throughout her 3 months in jail waiting on a court date, she kept asking for mental health treatment and medication.
I couldn't even tell you how many grievances I put in, how many inquiries I put into medical, how many correction officers I asked. I asked numerous times. I did everything except say I was going to kill myself.
Although Umps says she was not suicidal, she believed that saying she was could help her get access to a psychiatrist and potentially medication.
I couldn't even count the number of times that somebody said, I'm going to go pickle myself.
That means an inmate would tell the jail guards that they were suicidal. Then they'd be put in a suicide watch cell in what they call a pickle suit.
And it looks like a hard shell on the front and back, like a turtle shell. And then it's got Velcro straps on the sides and the top that holds it to you. But other than that, you are completely naked. And the only thing they give you to cover up with is a little paper sheet.
So I want to make sure I understand. So you're in the general population.
Yeah.
And somebody says, I'm going to go pickle myself. Why would they say that?
Because in order to be released back into population, they make you sit up there for 72 hours and then they make you see a psychiatrist before you can go back to population. So you actually leave from being the pickle suit with medications before you go back to the population, instead of having to wait months to get in to see psych.
So
they're willing to sacrifice having a shower for 3 days, having any kind of luxury at all, their clothes even. They're willing to sacrifice everything.
So that they can get
can get medication, yeah, or at least some kind of assessment.
Yeah, well, why didn't you tell them that you might kill yourself? I mean, apparently you've told me that would be something that would kind of accelerate your case, that would cause them to pay attention to you.
Yeah, I didn't want to sit naked in a room full of people for 72 hours with no shower or nothing. It was worth it to suffer through it. I'd rather suffer mentally than physically. I would not want to be humiliated like that. Because when you're in that cell, like I said, every inmate that comes through that door, every cop, everybody that comes through there, you're on display.
Umps says after about 3 months of incarceration, she finally received medication for depression and anxiety.
Once you actually get put on the medication, that was the problem with Eastern Regional Jail. With them being so understaffed, sometimes it would be 11 o'clock at night before you got your medication. Some days we went without getting it at all for a certain time period.
Like how long?
Like they did a morning, evening, and afternoon. It was very rarely you ever got your evening one, like the middle one. But sometimes like you wouldn't get your night dose. The next time you would see them would be the morning dose. So you'd miss a whole dose of your medication.
When she testified before the legislature, Umps told a shorter version of her story. She also shared accounts of the deferred maintenance at correction facilities and stark physical conditions.
I went 3 days with no toilet paper because they said they ran out. Because of staff shortage, we were locked down for days at a time, one time a week with no shower. Some of us locked in with no water in our sink because it went without maintenance.
Maybe most importantly, she spoke about how long she spent behind those walls.
I was in jail for 3 months on my first offense. I lost my daughter, my home, my career, and my 21-acre farm that I had successfully managed for 12 years. That was 3 years ago, and since then, I've been incarcerated for 15 months. Not for new charges, but for technical violations of failed urine analysis. I'm sharing my story here today because I believe we can work together to come up with long-lasting solutions to the jail overcrowding and find alternatives to incarceration that actually help people heal from trauma, recover from substance use disorder, and feel a part of the community again.
Thanks in part to the testimony of Umps and others, the West Virginia legislature passed a new law called the Capias Law. It ensures that anyone arrested on a capias or a bench warrant gets a hearing within 5 days. The law went into effect in June 2023. We should say here that we asked multiple times to speak with the West Virginia Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation about Ump's story, but they did not grant us an interview. For Ashley Umps, it wasn't until she was out of jail, in therapy, that she found a way to, as she calls it, turn her pain into her power. She does not call what she experienced rehabilitation. She went into custody, fresh off a trauma, and experiencing a mental health crisis. And she found herself in a system that she says did not have the staff or knowledge to treat her. For investigative reporter Mary Beth Pfeiffer, this is a familiar story.
This nation has gone from one bad system to another. From housing people with mental illness in large, impersonal, often abusive institutions called mental hospitals, to housing people with mental illness in large, impersonal, often abusive institutions called prisons.
I asked Mary Beth Pfeiffer to read that excerpt from her book called Crazy in America, about the mental health crisis behind bars. In it, she says she doesn't like the word crazy, but uses it intentionally.
What is crazy is how we treat people with mental illness in America. It is crazy that the criminal justice system has assumed care of hundreds of thousands of mentally ill people.
Pfeiffer's book felt remarkably prescient to me, especially when I realized she wrote it 16 years ago.
There are so many inmates who are in prison who do not need to be there, who are there by virtue of being mentally ill, who could be cared for outside of prisons.
Through her reporting, Pfeiffer became something of an expert on the road America took to get here.
Can you give us a kind of a high-level view of the history of the issue and how it's played out in the United States?
Well, let's rewind to about the 1950s. In New York State, we actually had something on the order of 90,000 beds in mental hospitals. We had many, many people in institutions where they were ostensibly cared for, but also where they were warehoused. And recognition grew that civil rights of people to be free were being violated by virtue of keeping them there for long periods of time.
At the beginning of the 1950s, there was another development that changed the landscape. A drug called Thorazine hit the market.
It was a way to effectively, if imperfectly, treat people with schizophrenia and other psychotic illnesses. So that led to the emptying of many mental hospitals. People could survive to some extent on the streets of America.
So the idea was, we don't need a brick and mortar institution. We can actually handle this problem through chemicals or pharmacology.
Yes, and more drugs developed over time that allowed us to have people live in their own homes and function more or less in society. These were imperfect drugs. There was often relapses. There were other problems that ensued. Probably one of the biggest problem is that we did not have places for many of these people who were released from mental hospitals to go. We didn't have housing for them. We didn't have programs for them. They needed support and they needed help that their own families could not provide.
In the 60s, new federal legislation provided essential services and housing to people with mental illness. But Pfeiffer says the money wasn't there to back it up. Meanwhile, a tough-on-crime approach was becoming popular in the U.S. It was a perfect storm.
Okay, we have mentally ill people flooding the streets. We have the growth of this prison system and this punitive culture with longer prison sentences and more people going to prisons. Those two things collided. And mentally ill people will often self-medicate.
People were being picked up for minor infractions, smoking marijuana in public, disorderly conduct.
They might the first time be given a fine. The second time, they might go to jail for a few days. The third time, even though it's the same charge, they might draw real jail time. So what we had was mentally ill people sort of climbing a ladder of infraction after infraction until the prison sentence or the jail sentence got so high that they were put away.
Housing, Pfeiffer says, has always been one of the biggest missing pieces to this whole puzzle.
So people were released, but to communities that were wholly unprepared to deal with them, and to families who were unprepared to deal with them. So yes, what we had was people flooding the streets, institutions contracting because all of a sudden governments saw a way to save a lot of money and did not follow up with the resources that were needed to support these people in the community. They needed places to live. And maybe it was 10, 20 years later, even 30 years later, that group homes started to be built. They needed treatment programs to, provide counseling, to provide substance abuse treatment. We were missing an infrastructure to care for people with mental illness in the community that was slowly developed in the years after they were released, but still is just a fraction of what it should be even today.
In the 90s and the early 2000s, when Pfeiffer did her reporting, much of her work focused on solitary confinement and people who died by suicide while incarcerated.
There's something in New York State prisons when I was covering them. It was called the bubble. And it was a plexiglass or glass enclosed unit where they would put people who were particularly out of control, almost always mentally ill, for a period of time when they believed that they were such a threat to themselves that they had to strip them, They had to put them in a totally stark room where they would find nothing in the way of a sheet or anything else with which to harm themselves. Often it was cold. They might be given a little mat to lay on, something like that. But this is just one of the many abuses in a system that doesn't know how to take care of the needs of someone with mental illness.
This was starting to sound eerily familiar to me. I asked Pfeiffer about the accounts I'd heard from Lara Lawson, Danny Deneen, and Ashley Umps. The paper clothes, the glass rooms, the pickle suit. The narratives are not exactly the same as they were 20 years ago, but to Pfeiffer, they resonate.
At virtually every level, including when you really act out and you're put in this sort of bubble thing where you have absolutely no privacy at all, where you are supposedly being protected from yourself, you are given the message that you're worthless, that we have no respect for you. We don't value your dignity in any way, shape, or form. And you have to think that that is not exactly the way to make someone act better, the way to lead to reform, the way to create a human being who's going to go out on the streets inevitably at some point and be better.
The U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics says at least 95% of all people in state prisons will be released at some point. Pfeiffer says the focus on security is blinding us to the fact that inmates, including those with mental illness, are people.
Putting someone in a situation where you can see every move they make and keep your eye on them certainly is going to protect them from harming themselves. Is it going to make them better? Not at all. But this is just one of the tools that they use, along with the batons, along with the tasers sometimes, along with long solitary confinement housing, along with many other ways that they signal to the inmate that we are in charge.
Pfeiffer's book makes the point that in our society, handcuffs and bars have replaced treatment. But she doesn't place all of the fault on the people who work in jails, or even those who run them.
I think that the people who run prison systems are motivated by fear. They are afraid of the people that they are supposed to be taking care of, that they are supposed to be housing, providing medical care to, ostensibly rehabilitating. But they are afraid of them.
Well, some of them are dangerous, aren't they?
Many of them, some of them are, yes, dangerous. People with mental illness certainly can be dangerous. But the fear that motivates prison managers is taken to an extent that is far beyond the threat. People with mental illness can be managed in different ways. They can be treated.
Ashley Umps was able to find successful treatment after incarceration. She wishes she could have gotten mental health support long before she ended up behind bars. But she says she was afraid to ask for help because of how she saw society treating mental illness.
Growing up with my mom being bipolar and manic depressive, I saw her in and out of mental institutions, and then people call her crazy, things that are offensive, and it makes it really hard to step forward and say, hey, I got a problem. And then, of course, the first thing people want to do when you say you're going to kill yourself is they want to lock you in a padded room somewhere, which I feel like does not do anything to address the underlying cause of why you want to kill yourself in the first place.
UMPS now works for the West Virginia Family of Convicted People, an organization that advocates for the incarcerated and their families. She wants to encourage policies that she believes will improve West Virginia's jails. But for anyone who's incarcerated in the meantime, she has a message.
That it's temporary.
Say more.
That was what got me through, just realizing that it was only temporary, that they couldn't keep me forever.
You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this show was me, Trey Kay, Emily Havick, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to the people who shared their stories with us: Ashley Umps, Lara Lawson, and Danny Deneen. And to Mountain State Justice, and also to Lyda Shepard, Kenny Matthews, Patrick McGinley, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting News Director Eric Douglas. Michael Lipton, Tristan Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, and the CRC Foundation. This episode is supported with a grant from the Just Trust. Hey, we'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Would you share them with us on our Facebook page or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Us Them Podcast? Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.